Welcome to the Attractions Group podcast. This is episode 100, believe it or not. I'm Ryan Sir, along with Don Helbig. Don, how you doing?
Doing great, Ryan. How about you?
I'm doing pretty well. It's going to be a really good episode. But before we get into that, you visited some more parks as part of the Summer of Dawn. Tell us about that.
I did. Busy week last week. Visited Six Flags Great America, Gurnee, Illinois, just on the outskirts of Chicago. Had a terrific day there. Got a chance to kind of ride some of my old favorites again, and they've added a lot of new hardware since I'd last been there, so it had been a minute. But just a great time there. And then toward the end of the week, went to Six Flags Great Escape in Queensbury, New York. That was for about a year my home park when I lived in Albany, New York. It was nice to see the changes that the park had made since I'd last been there. Signage looked great. Water park, looked nice. The Comet, one of my favorite roller coasters, got a chance to ride that again, and the new Bobcat roller coaster done by our friends from the Gravity Group. That ride was fantastic. And then from there it was traveled back into Pennsylvania, and I hit Waldameer. What an adorable park. Absolutely loved it. A lot of charm to it. In a lot of ways, it reminded me of Cincinnati's old Coney Island, not in the terms of how it, looked and everything, but just kind of how it felt. You had the traditional amusement park kind of fare, the cotton candy, the hot dogs, the pizza, those kind of things. But the park was, beautifully landscaped, a lot of fun, and couldn't get enough of the Ravine Flyer too.
Yeah.
That ride is amazing. And for a wooden coaster, I think it might have the best view from the top of the lift that you're going to find, because as soon as you get to the top, all you see out in front of you is Lake Erie. Scenery wise, the ride was great, but all the things that it does, a lot of action nonstop, in a lot of ways reminded me of what you see at Holiday World, with the Voyage, not as long as the Voyage, but a lot of the same kind of elements with a lot of quick, turns and drops and an abundance of airtime. So I absolutely love that ride. So it was a busy week, but glad to be back in the greater Cincinnati area and ready to do episode number 100 here.
Yeah, it's a milestone. And before we delve into the episode here, and it's another big one, let me remind you that you can follow us on all your favorite podcast apps, Apple, Google, Spotify. The place to be is on YouTube by searching for the Attractions Group podcast, and follow us on X at attractions_GRP. Now, Don, I know that you visited several parks, a couple Six Flags parks, a couple Cedar Fair parks. Have you heard that those companies merged while you were gone?
Yeah, I heard a little something about that. I think I got an alert on X that, something about the two chains, got together and merged, and now it's one big family.
Awesome. Well, that's what everyone's been talking about for months now, and especially the past couple weeks, because the merger did close as predicted on July 1st, as they said. So, as opposed to us sharing just our opinions about it, which we've done at length, we're going to bring in the experts. So, Don, tell us who we have.
Well, we'd like to welcome back to the Attractions Group podcast for the third time. He is the founder and CEO of International Theme Park Services. He's a member of the IAAPA Hall of Fame. Of course, I'm talking about Dennis Speigel. Dennis, how you doing?
I'm good, guys. How are you?
Doing great.
Yeah.
Hey, Don, did they have any Buc-ee's up there where you were on the...
They did not. And all I could think about is that long stretch on 90 as I'm going into New York. We could certainly use a Buc-ee's here, but no, plenty of Sheets. But if you're looking for Buc-ee's, no. But there's definitely one needed in that part of New York.
I think you need to become a consultant to Buc-ee's and give them a routing for their new restaurants and stops.
Well, yeah, I mean, it'd be a great opportunity for them to be in that part of the country. I think ultimately, they will be. They're making their way around.
They'll be everywhere. Yeah.
I worry about that, though. We're already off on a tangent. We have a very important episode with a very important guest, and here we are talking about Buc-ee's like normal. But
Buc-ee's is life, Ryan. The rest is just
that is correct. But so my concern with Buc-ee's is for us, being in the Cincinnati area, for example, when we go to Dollywood, when we drive there, it used to be the halfway point was Buc-ee's just outside of Richmond, Kentucky. So it was a big deal to stop there. And if there's one in every city, like why would you go through the hassle of stopping there if you've got access to one all times? So
Well, Ryan, they're all a little different, and how they're. It's just like going to a different, theme parks. They're all a little different.
no,
There's a difference between Disneyland and Disney World. So the
You know
Buckies
what
are the
though?
same.
That's a good point though, Don, that Ryan brings up, and I'll tell you why. The example is when the Hard Rocks first came out.
Mhm.
You had New York, you had London, you had the big cities, and I know when my family was young, and whenever we were traveling, or I was overseas, we'd always go to the Hard Rock and stand in line outside to buy the pin and go and eat the. But when it became like you said in every city, it kind of fell by the wayside after a while. So, but there's a lot of places for a Bucky's to be
There is.
located, and
Okay.
Don will pinpoint them all. We know that.
Just make sure they're not too geographically close. Uh so I guess we're talking about a merger here, and we're not talking about the merging between the Bucky's Corporation and everything that Don has to talk about. We're talking about Six Flags
Yep.
and what was formerly known as Cedar Fair, now together under the Six Flags name. So, Dennis, let's dive right into that. So, why don't you, from your perspective, why don't you provide some of the context of the significance of the merger when it comes to like this day and age in history for the theme park industry? It seems like this is definitely something notable on the timelines.
Yeah, and let me say at the outset, when this happened, it didn't really come as a surprise. Uh, for about 10 years, I've been asked by the media, who's going to buy who, what's the next big merge, and I always pointed out there were probably three players that we were looking at. It would be SeaWorld buying Cedar Fair, SeaWorld buying Six Flags, Cedar buying Six Flags. And I always said, but the one that makes the most sense is Six and Cedar merging and coming together. So when that came together, that announcement, it really didn't surprise me uh, much at all. And the importance of it is that it now creates the largest merger in our industry globally. So it's a huge undertaking, and a lot of work has to be done. It's really, now that it's closed, in my opinion, the hard work really gets started.
So Dennis, as the two companies, Six Flags and Cedar Fair, they start talking about a merger. They get to the point to where they agree in what they're going to do here. What do you think were some of the strategic objectives for both Six Flags and Cedar Fair in this merger?
Well, I think there are a lot of them. I mean, it crosses a lot of lanes, from IP to pricing to season passes to uh, just generally the layout of the theme park industry in the United States. We have a map here that we worked with for years at ITPS, and we've laid out every theme park in the United States. And when we do a feasibility study for a client, we break it out in concentric circles, population, 50 miles, 100 miles, 150, 200, and then beyond for tourist and tertiary market. And when you take the map and you lay out all the Six Flags parks, all the Cedar Fair parks, the Hershey Park, all of the theme parks that we the big ones that we're talking about, or will talk about. Um, it's amazing how in that inner core there's very little overlap. There's a couple of circles that overlap, maybe out in California, Magic Mountain and Knott's Berry Farm, for example. Maybe over in the East Coast, up in the East, Northeast, you see some overlaps with Great Adventure and some of the other parks. But overall, the parks are very well laid out, very spaced, and one of the one of the major, uh, I think, outcomes of this merger is it gives this new company a much better weather window for operations than they've ever had in the past, because now they cover the northeast, west, and south of the U.S. So if it's we're having the heat that we're seeing out in Vegas and over in the Southwest, Phoenix, and some of those places, we're not seeing that up in the Northeast. What are we seeing now? We're seeing here in Cincinnati, we're seeing the remnants of Beryl go through today and create some weather for us. So, but that's not affecting the West Coast. So, I see that as one huge factor, Ryan.
Yeah. So Dennis, continuing on with that, you, when we talk about the 42 properties that are involved in the Six Flags chain, uh, how do you think that this will affect like the guest experience? Because we have Six Flags, which they had their own way of doing stuff, and then you had Cedar Fair, which had their own way of doing stuff. Um, how do you think that somebody entering the gates of, say, Six Flags Fiesta Texas and or Cedar Point, how's this going to affect them, especially a few years down the line?
Well, first of all, that's the point. It isn't going to happen immediately. This homogenization of these two organizations at every level is going to take 5-6 years to really stabilize and then move forward. There's a lot of figuring out that they have to do. From the guest standpoint, I don't think the guest, quite frankly, is going to feel it. It's going to be behind the scenes in marketing and areas like that come first. Um, but ultimately, I think without question, the guest is the winner here. I think it's a win-win for both the new organization, but certainly for the guests, because I think it's going to bring a lot of benefits to them in pricing, product, uh, and just general visitation and broadening their experience from IP to the newest, tallest, longest, fastest, whatever it might be.
Yeah, Dennis, so what operational changes do you foresee happening as a result of this merger, both in the short term and the long term? Is it going to be a situation where, we look at Six Flags Over Texas this year, instead of being open daily, they were closing one day during the week. Do you see more things like that happening, or do you see parks trying to go a little bit more with like year-round calendars? What do you think is going to happen here down the road?
Well, I'm going to be brutally frank here. As I've said to the media and I've said to the investment banking community, Cedar Fair is clearly the wind beneath the wings of this merger. In my opinion, it really was not a merger of equals, because Six Flags has been a ship at sea without a captain for at least 8 years. We've had different chairmen come through, different entertainment companies own them, different directions. We've had action, no action. For example, when Jim Reed Anderson left, um, and Mike Spanos came in from the packaged good industry, Pepsi Cola or whoever he was with. He came in right at the on the doorstep. Excuse me, guys, of COVID. He was there almost 2 years to the week, and he got absolutely nothing done, no traction whatsoever with the company. And then they handed it off to the current chairman, or the former chairman, Salim Basul, who really had no idea what he was doing with that company. It's amazing to me the mistakes that were made during the last 2.5 years. I mean, that company has been, Six Flags was set back 8 years. Conversely, you've had a nose to the grindstone company like Cedar Fair, who has one single purpose, to operate parks. They don't have movies. They don't have some of the other baggage that operators have in the industry, and they've done, I think, a very good job of just moving forward and keeping their train on the track the way it should be. So operationally, to answer your question, Don, There's no question, guys. Cedar Fair is the driver. They're in the driver's seat, and they should be in the driver's seat. And they are. They're going to be put upon and called upon because of the changes that Six Flags has gone through the last few years, the negative changes, frankly, pricing, product, etc., marketing, season pass mix-ups, to bring their know-how and expertise to the job. And quite frankly, I know, Don, you know Richard Zimmerman as well as I do. Richard understands both the operating side of the ledger and the finance side of the ledger. He gets the P&L and the balance sheet, as well as having sat in the general manager's chair, understanding product and marketing of parks. So he and Tim Fisher and that team that we've seen outlined in the filings with the SEC. Incidentally, there was only one Six Flag person on that list who comes in at the transitional side. So it's very clear they're running the show. They will be running it, and they're going to bring their knowledge, experience, and expertise to the project. Now, I'll make one more comment and stop. This deal has happened very quickly. When you think that you've merged these two companies, bringing 42 parks together in less than a year, I've done quite a few mergers in the industry, and much smaller than this, 3 or 4 or 5 parks, and it's taken a year to a year and a half to get things closed and figure out the lay of the land. So I think there's a lot of examination that's going to go on from the standpoint of the dogs sniffing the dogs, if you will, and figuring each other out. But at the end of the day, that 52% that Cedar Fair holds runs the show. And quite frankly, in today's age, it should. There were 2 iconic companies in our industry when I came into it. One was Disney, and the other was Six Flags. Six Flags went through a history of issues, as we know, which brought them to this situation today. So Cedar is the wind beneath the wings.
That's that's why we come to you with these questions, Dennis. I gotta say. Okay, so here's a question, and I'm going to caveat it a little bit because we've been given this answer a lot to this question, but let me expand on it. So when it comes to park identities, I know that everyone's been assured like your park is going to stay your park. They're not going to slap the Six Flags name onto Kings Island or Cedar Point or whatever. Okay, cool. But here's the problem that I feel like they may run into, and I would love to have your perspective on it. So right now, if you buy a Six Flags pass, that's good for all the parks, whatever tier that they have. Their system is so convoluted now that it's hard for me to just pinpoint one. But it's easy to say this will get you into all the Six Flags parks. On the other hand, you've got the Cedar Fair parks where they're not branded in that way in terms of, Kings Island, Carowin, stuff like that. From the outside looking in, you would never know that they're related, but you do get a list of the park names. Do you think that it's sustainable, say, over the next 5-10 years, where if you've got a season pass that's good for 41 properties, where it's like anything that's called Six Flags plus these other dozen or so properties, like, do you think that in the long term is going to work out, or do you think ultimately they're going to have a brand that everybody unites under?
Both. In the short term, ultimately you're going to have a brand that everybody unites under, and it should be, and it will be the Six Flags name probably. And again, coming back to my last comment about 2 companies, Disney and Six Flags. Disney was the destination icon. Six Flags was the regional icon, and they will. When I remember when Disney bought Marvel, and I got calls from the media, and I got calls from the investment community questioning why they would do that. They can't use Marvel; they're at Universal, and I said, "Look, this plan has been on the table and been discussed for a couple of years. They didn't buy Marvel to put them in the closet and up on the shelf. They bought them to use them." And I said, they'll use them overseas first. And then as time goes on, There will be machinations that occur in the agreements that allow them to use them in the United States. That's exactly what happened. I think the partial answer to your question, Ryan, is that it doesn't make sense to go in and hang Six Flags on all of the parks at this point in time. I remember when Paramount bought Kings Island, and they put Paramount up on the sign at Kings Island. You remember this, Don? There was a lot of backlash in the local markets. Well, keep in mind that these parks and the markets they're located in all have their own personalities, and people look upon them as their parks. They have to earn that, and that's going to take a while to happen. So that 3 or 5 or 6 years you mentioned, Ryan, it's before this all unfolds and all is brought under one umbrella of name. It'll, in my opinion, it'll be at least 10 years. As I said at the outset, it's going to take 5 or 6 years for this to stabilize. And keep in mind, when you brand and you bring in IP, and we should talk about that in a minute, it's an expensive proposition. You have signage and all of these other elements that come with the IP. Just because they're merging, that doesn't mean that they don't. The one park who has Snoopy and one who has DC can just cross them over and use them. They've got to pay for those in the parks. There's licensing agreements and thousands of pages of documents that'll have to be gone through. I remember when we were doing this with Hanna-Barbera, and we owned the company, Taft did, and we were doing it internally. It's a huge undertaking. So ultimately, answer to your question, Rye, is yeah, it's going to be under the Six Flags name. At least that's what I think it'll be at this point in time. And um, I don't think it's going to happen immediately, but I could see some Six Flags names going up on some of the parks over the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, Dennis, what do you expect to see? With the change in terms of new ride and attraction development, both Six Flags and Cedar Fair, seem to do things a lot different when it came to new attractions. You look at the Halloween season, what Six Flags is doing at Magic Mountain and a couple of their other parks, what Cedar Fair has traditionally done with Halloween Haunt. You've got the different teams, that were in the corporate office at Cedar Fair, and then Six Flags had its teams that did like the Halloween season and other things. So how do you think that's all going to kind of develop and come together?
Well, it's going to be a huge learning curve for this new organization, and there are going to be hits and misses, and this is why I say this doesn't happen. All of this implementation doesn't happen overnight because, again, they're going to be going through this learning program about each other. And I'm sure that through that homogenization, as I said earlier, you're going to have the two teams that are working together, and they have to work together. This can't happen any other way. So that's why I say it's clearly under the Cedar Fair domain, and they're going to be making the calls, but they're going to be listening to uh, the parks, the Six Flags parks, and the Six Flags parks are going to be observing and watching the Cedar Fair parks. Remember, they're gonna show everybody now everything they've got, and that hasn't been the case in 50 years. So it's going to be a real learning process, but it's going to be a growing process, and that's what has to happen for this program to be successful, and then start rooting itself in the different elements: product, pricing, marketing, naming, soft side cups and spoons and saucers, and buying roller coasters in large numbers now and getting value from that. So a lot of things are going to be going on in this organization.
So, Dennis, the first question the second question after the is it going to be Six Flags over Sandusky question. The next question that everybody seems to ask is, okay, well, what about season passes? So, obviously you don't have any more information than anybody else, or at least that you can tell us if you do. But Cedar Fair had, I guess, a pretty decent portfolio of parks in which you had options to be able to get into all the parks, and Six Flags had even more parks where you could get into all the where you could get in with certain season passes. So my question is this: do you think that whatever option that they have for being able to go to all the parks, let's just for the sake of argument say it's the all park passport, since you've been mentioning that Cedar Fair seems to be at the helm, do you think that that is going to go up substantially, or do you think that it's going to be about the same? And second part of the question is, when they first merged, they put something on all the websites of all the parks saying like an FAQ, and they kind of alluded to the fact that we understand that you guys probably want a pass that gets into both Cedar Fair and Six Flags parks, and that's coming. Without so many words, they implied that it was. So, do you think that it's too soon to implement that for 2025? Or do you think that that's going to be something in the future? Can they afford to wait? Like, what are your thoughts on how the season passing is going to unfold? Is what I'm basically asking.
Yeah, well, I think, Ryan, it's the single of the top five things. I think it's the single biggest issue that they have to deal with. Keep in mind now that roughly 57% and roughly 57 or 8% of Cedar and 57-58% of Six Flags aggregate attendance, each of those using those percentage, come through the season pass. That's huge. You talk about the old overused statement, too many eggs in one basket. That is huge. Look at the millions of people that brings together. So I would think it would be very, very difficult to have a total rounded out program for 2025, but it's the most important thing they're going to have to work on internally to understand first, again, the lay of the land of all the parks, the personalities of all the parks. And I don't mean the people, I mean the parks themselves and the markets, to figure out that season pass program. And, I guess another answer to that would be look at Disney. They just last week announced changes to their season pass programs, and that's about the fourth or fifth uh, change to the Genie and My Magic and all of that they've done in the last 3 or 4 years. So they've been having season passes for decades, and they still don't have it where they want it. They're still working on that because they know how important it is to their success and how important it is to the guests. I mean, we saw the guests at Six Flags when they changed their season pass program. They took away the dining and the financing and everything. There was a rebellion, and that's why they lost a lot of that attendance. That 6 million attendance in that very short period of time. Basically, two theme parks, Georgia and St. Louis, if you will. So um, they've got to get that right. There will be tiering, Ryan. I'll use the airlines as the example. You got your silver, your gold, your platinum, your diamond, and I'll say moon rock. Okay. There's going to be a moon rock. And we know from reading the blogs and the history of how people support it, who buy the season passes, that there will be a tremendous amount of crossover from within parks. Now, up to this point in time, let's pick Worlds of Fun in Kansas City and Six Flags St. Louis. The people who live in Kansas City, when they wanted to go to a theme park, they didn't get up in the morning and say, hey, let's drive to St. Louis to get the same Big Mac and French fries that they could get at Worlds of Fun, have it over in St. Louis. They maybe did that every few years or 5 or 6 years, but now there will be reason because it's that pass is going to allow them to do that. So Carowinds to Atlanta, up in the Northeast, some of those parks you were mentioning, Great Escape, Great Adventure, uh, some of the Dorney Park, some of those that are in that area, they could they will cross over, and we know there's a certain amount of people who come to the parks, the the groupies, whatever you want to call them, the parkies, they will use this program and they will buy that. And I've been told that already by a lot of people. So, but again, it's a very complex program, and this is the one they got to get right up front. It's going to take adjustment, but they got to get it right.
Yeah, Dennis, I agree with you there because I remember when Cedar Fair purchased the Paramount Parks. Paramount Parks had a very successful season pass program. Cedar Fair Parks did not, and they tried to bring the Cedar Fairway into it, and it got off to a really rough start. And I almost had to like typically relaunch the season pass program going into like 2008 because I remember 2007 was kind of a rough year there with that.
Yeah, yeah. So,
But Dennis, whenever there's a merger with any of the businesses in the world, I mean, anytime there's a merger, there's always some kind of potential impact on the workforce. So, what do you see the potential impact might be on these parks with the workforce? Ranging from the frontline employees to the corporate staff.
well, that's a good question. I've been asked that a lot in the last month, and my answer is this: because of the deterioration of the level of personnel and experience at Six Flags, which has gone down dramatically, uh, certainly the last 3 years, they lost 7 park presidents through either attrition uh, or firing, and one passed away. Uh, that's an incredible amount of experience in our industry, and that carried down into the parks. And then there were people turned loose at corporate in Six Flags. So I think Cedar Fair, Richard Zimmerman, Tim Fisher, their teams are going to be called upon heavily to inject their experience and personnel from that company. And this is what typically happens when big companies like this merge into the Six Flags organization to help bring that back up to the level that it has to come back up to. So there are soft issues, there are hard issues that are involved with this, but from a personnel standpoint, it's going to be, I think, more crossover from Cedar into Six than Six into Cedar. There'll be a little bit of the Six into Cedar, but I think it's more the other way. Again, remember who's driving the train.
Yeah, an excellent point. Now, it's been stated a lot, and I'm not really ready to discount this statement, but it sounds like a lot of this was a merger of necessity from a financial standpoint. From your perspective, using the public record that's out there, what do you think that the advantages of the financials coming out of that versus the disadvantages, like the challenges that they're going to have? What kind of picture does that paint over the next decade or so for the company?
Well, as I said, I think earlier, I did not look upon this as a merger of equals because Six Flags was uh, so suppressed and depressed, I should say, from years ago and where they are. Quite frankly, it's just fact. Look at the numbers, look at the company, look at the parks. I had a person tell me today at lunch they went to the St. Louis park recently, and there were actually things boarded up in the park. They couldn't believe what they saw when they got there. There's been a tremendous drain on that company. So, from the standpoint of how did you ask that, Ryan? I, I, I want to get
So,
that point.
okay, so maybe I should clarify a little bit more. So, there's a lot of debt involved, from both companies, from COVID,
Yeah.
from the Paramount acquisition, and Six Flags, their shopping problem that they had for the past 30 years. So, the merger obviously is going to have some synergies, which will save them money and stuff. But now we got the combined debt as well. So,
Yep.
how do you think that the financial situation is going to shake out, like in the long term, as far as the cost savings versus the larger debt? And with the larger debt, we also have high interest rates right now, and so on. I'm not saying like a whole financial rundown, but like, what's your thoughts on that? Do you think that they have
Well,
a better shot?
yeah, they put forth numbers. They put forth 120 million that's going to be saved in the operating side, 80 million, some of the other 40 million, and I think it's aggressive, honestly. Um, and I say that simply. That's what you say when you're merging and let the markets figure that out in the investment banks. But um, we're in a different world in 24 than we were in 2015. It would have been different back then. But a lot of another overly used term that I hear constantly from the banking world, where's the low hanging fruit? Well, the low hanging fruit's been taken, and that started in 2020 when COVID hit us, and we had to not only do um, we always do zero based budgeting, but we had to come up with something we had never done in our industry before, and that's zero based planning. I mean, we literally went back to and tore up all the playbooks and said disinfection, sanitizing, moving people, queue lines, separation, closing, opening, bathrooms, everything from the smallest to the largest changed. And when we did that, we learned a lot, but there was a lot of expense cut that were made because they had to be to get the numbers and save these parks from going through catastrophic events, and so that's gone. And there was a lot of bloodletting, a lot of people gone, both at the corporate, at the park levels, down into the park, the bowels of the park. So labor's our biggest single biggest cost element on our P&L. It always has been. It usually approximates, or it used to, about 50%. Now it's about 64, 65% because of the wages that we've had to increase through the years because of the shortage of personnel and having to pay more. So uh, marketing, there's going to be some savings there. They'll learn something. The uh, interesting part I think that we have to watch is a theme park's like a restaurant smorgasbord. When you go there, whether you eat it all or not, you expect everything to be open. And like a smorgasbord, you want everything out. You make your choice to close this down and open this up. And that's been done through the last few years in parks. Daytime, nighttime, weekend, weekday. Um, that we're going to have to see how this is affected and how changes are made. I don't think we'll see a lot of that. Uh, but you know what it comes down to, in my estimation, the word I kept or keep using is price value. It's going to really be a price value conscious driven program by the parks and the people who come to the park. Excuse me, because we have always been in our industry from day one a market up and market down industry. We discount. You can find a discount to a theme park on the bottom of your shoe. Nobody pays full price. We all know that. So they got to come up with a good balance in the season passes, at the rack rate, in their group sales, in their promotions in the future, and make this a value oriented experience for the guest. And that all comes into that mixing that they're going to have to do after they understand all of the elements that they're dealing with. So, uh, but ultimately, I think the guest wins. I think they really do because they're going to get a better product, a more sophisticated product, and they're going to get a broader product that they can go to.
Yeah, Dennis, how does this merger position the new Six Flags against the other, major players in the industry, like Disney and Universal?
Don, I don't think this. I've been asked that, and I don't think it uh, affects Disney and Universal. Let's say Orlando, really. Um, that's a destination vacation, and families don't take that every year. That's a every 3, 4, 5 year kind of visit, and I don't think that's going to change. I think what really changes is it allows the people who are the regional theme park goers to say, that's only a day and a half trip now. Let's do it. We can do that. They're not getting on an airplane. They're not flying. They're not paying, $500 per ticket. Uh, so I don't think Disney and Universal and SeaWorld and those attractions are really impacted uh, at all. There might be a little bit of chink in the armor, but not enough to show on their balance sheet. Excuse me. Gosh.
Okay, so when it comes to theme parks, I don't need to preach to you. You know this already, that the integration into the community is one of the stepping stones of success in terms of outreach, the charitable stuff. It's one of your ways to make noise.
Yep.
So now for each and every one of these parks, the parent company has doubled in size, essentially. How do you think that affects the community surrounding the parks themselves?
I don't think it changes because, as I said a couple of times during this discussion, Ryan, each park has its own personality. It's part of that community. And I don't think that changes for the worse. Anything that might come in, I think, is better for that community. I don't think it takes away from what they've had and what they've experienced. What I do think is, and I haven't been asked this question a lot, but I've been thinking about it since the last 2 or 3 weeks, is look at the possibility, and this could affect communities too, for national sponsorship. Look at this now. Um, a lot of parks that exist today do sponsorship with local communities. But when you have 42 parks, you have something this size. Look at the potential for this company to generate its sponsorships nationally and internationally. Look at how many people they're going to reach now. And when I say reach, in our marketing business, it's frequency and reach. They'll get them frequently and they can reach them often. They have a long reach. And this is going to open up sponsorship opportunities, particularly in the regional, that we've never ever seen in the industry.
Cool.
So, Dennis, what do you think is going to be the key factors that's going to determine the success of the merger down the road, like 4 or 5 years from now?
Two things, Don. It'll be a lot of things, but two things. It'll be that price value uh, element that I talked about. A good deal for a good price, a good visit for a good price, a good value. That'll be one thing. It'll be the broadening of the experience and some of the companies that are going to come to this company now, uh, bringing sponsorship opportunities and technology. Let's go back to Disney when they opened Disney World. I mean, look at all the sponsorships they had, uh, and what did those sponsors do then? They paid for those pavilions and those attractions, whether it was General Motors or Nestle or whomever it might have been. They came in and they paid for those, and some of those attractions at Disney World and Epcot were some of the best things we've ever seen, and that happened in our industry. So that's going to happen. I believe it's going to open those kinds of doors. And who's the winner there? I mean, it's the guests when they come and they see this huge uh, plethora, if you will, of entertainment and activities that are being generated because of the size of this new company. It's going to be a lot to manage. I mean, it's going to be huge. As I said 10 times, it's a huge undertaking.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you know, I want to take a slightly deeper dive into one thing. I feel like everybody has kind of discussed some of the. I mean, you mentioned the opposite side, the revenue, the sponsorship opportunities. Now that there's so many properties, but um, they said they're going to have this much savings with operational cost and so on. Where do you think that most of the overlap lies as far as duplicated positions or the cost involved? So basically, my ramble is trying to get at is, where do you think that most of the cost savings with essentially doubling the size of the company is going to come from? Is it just buying in bulk, or do you think that they could, maybe shed some positions because you don't need two of the same person doing the same thing with both chains? Like, where do you think that's going to come from in bulk?
Well, I don't think it's equal in nature today on the personnel scale. I think Cedar Fair has, as I said earlier, a deeper, broader bench strength than Six Flags. So I don't see a lot of overlap. I see some, but not a lot. I don't see it in marketing. I don't see it in finance. So I'm not sure it's going to be that large there. But I do see the the parks in the future when they're working together, Ryan. I see them benefiting from, again, expertise that each park has group has developed through the years, and in a way that um, ends up contributing to the bottom line, because that's what they're going to be looking at. And you're asking about savings. Um, I look at two buckets, if you will. I look at the soft bucket and the hard bucket. The soft bucket is, for ease and simplicity here, it's the the cups, the plates, the straws, the popcorn bags, and all the things that we use and cost of sales and to service our guests. That's gonna come and be more standardized, and they're going to be able to buy in a volume that is enormous, never seen before in either one of those companies. Then you got the you got the hard bucket, and that's the rides and attractions. So let's say um, they're going to have to be very judicious in their capex programs. You look at attendance by ticket type. You're looking at by a demo. You're looking at children, teens, young adults, young families, adults with families, and each one of those, as we know, is a different uh, ride and attraction demographic. So they're going to be looking at that. They're going to sit down with Jim Shea at Premier Rides and say, "Hey, Jim, uh, we've got a coaster here that we want to put in 8 of our parks, and we want you to give us a good, fair price, and we're going to buy these from you, and we're going to work this out. And you know what you have in your queue line for manufacturing, and we know we've got ours, but we want a good price." So that's the way it's going to come, Ryan, in ways like that. And that'll filter down. And the more they are come together and understand each other's operations in those markets, the more opportunities they're going to see avail.
Yeah.
Well, Dennis, now let's talk about Peanuts, DC Comics, and Looney Tunes. So, where do you think the value lies with the new Six Flags if they're forced to choose between these three properties in terms of relevance and marketability, or is there going to be a world where they can all three exist?
Well, I don't think they know at this point in time. And keep in mind what I said earlier, when you're working in the IP world, it's very expensive, from signage and lighting and uh, just general introduction of that IP into a ride or an attraction, theming, whatever it might be. And what's relevant in one park may not be relevant in the next park. I think they'll find that out. Um, we know that Snoopy and the Peanuts characters are uh, have been around for 50 plus years, and they're still popular. DC, Looney Tunes. Um, what's relevant to the markets today is, and I'm asking the question really, not of you guys, but I'm just saying, is Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman and the Green Lantern and the Joker, are they as important today as they were when Bob Pittman brought them in to Six Flags back in the 90s. Uh, Maybe not. They may not be as popular. It's kind of like, Don, what we started out with at Kings Island, Hanna-Barbera. At that time, Hanna-Barbera was the number two uh, generator of cartoons in the United States behind Disney, big, big popular stuff. And today, if you ask kids and about who Hanna Barbera is, uh, or 5 years ago, they wouldn't probably even know. Now it's starting to come back, and Scooby Doo and the Jetsons and Flintstones. We're starting to see them come through Cartoon Network and other things. So it's going to be a give and take kind of situation that they have to figure out. And keep in mind, this just isn't boom. They just, because they bought one and they merged. That doesn't mean you get the rights to those parks. You still have to pay, and there's going to be a ticket for each one of those IPs wherever they're used. So they got to figure out what makes sense and what doesn't.
Well, I want to go on the record saying that I would buy a ticket to see Charlie Brown fight Batman. I'm just trying to put a worm in whoever's ears listening. But um, so one of the topics that kind of resurfaced as a result of the merger news is the future of California's Great America. So for those who don't know, the company that was known as Cedar Fair sold the land underneath the park that they had purchased from the city of Santa Clara, and they announced that they're going to operate it for a few more years, and then they plan to close the park. And they're currently leasing the land. How do you think that the merger, if at all, affects the future of California's Great America?
I don't think it does, because I think that's already been on a path, Ryan. That land is more valuable as a for development of the in the what do they call it, the icon, what's the valley, the what's it?
Silicon Valley?
Silicon Valley. Yeah, it's more
Yeah.
valuable than it is as an operating park. I almost bought that park for a client a few years ago. We looked at it, and quite frankly, we had a sunset on it too. Had we bought it, we would have operated it for a little bit, and then we would have probably sold it off. So, um, in a park like that, that's going to be around for another couple of years, you probably won't see much change, because you've got other parks out there now for in Vallejo and other that'll be in this portfolio of parks. So you don't have to drive that far to get the same. Again, I'll use Big Mac if they want to put it in the park down the road. So I don't think it's going to affect that deal or that park much at all. That's why they're going to have to be very careful in figuring out. You're certainly not going to add IP to that park, and then it's going to be gone in a couple of years.
Mhm.
Dennis, one of the things that, it was talked about, with all the releases and a lot of the news stories said, it was a merger of equals, but then they see with the recent announcement of the board that it's, primarily dominated with Cedar Fair people. How would you explain that when they read one thing and it's something else?
Well, as I said at the outset, I never saw this as a merger of equals. I always thought Cedar Fair was the larger, more appropriate operator to take the helm, and that's the only thing that would make this deal work, because of Six Flags' demise over the last decade, or however many years you want to say. So it's it's going to be driven by Richard Zimmerman, Tim Fisher, their team, Witherrow. Those are the guys who are going to run this company, and they're at the controls, and that's the way it has to be. And if anybody doesn't believe that, they're just absolutely wrong.
Yeah. So, one thing that you made mention of, like, premier rides, as far as we want to buy 10 of these rides, and you get the bulk discount, and whatever. But
Yeah,
let's explore that just a little bit more. So there's only a few dozen mainstream ride manufacturers out there. Um, and one of the benefits, obviously, is going to be what you mentioned. The new Six Flags Corporation might go to Premier or B&M and say, we want 5 coasters, or whatever.
yeah,
And then that's guaranteed business at that point. And then obviously on the other polar end is, I'm going to use an example of a defunct manufacturer so I don't upset anybody, but we installed this new Aero roller coaster. It's really problematic. It's always down, and people hate it. So we're not going to work with them anymore. So I feel like there's two ends of how this could turn out as far as how this is going to work for ride manufacturers doing business in the United States. Where do you think it's going to lie between the two? Do you think it's going to be a net benefit or a net loss for them?
I think it's a net benefit, really, for the manufacturers all globally. We all know who they are. It's Cinnamon, it's Vekoma, it's Premier, it's Zamperla. It's we can name them all. Uh, I think what the mentality of Cedar Fair is different than the mentality of Six Flags under a management regime before Dan Schneider came in, where they whipsawed and and beat the manufacturers up and would say, "Okay, we're going to buy 6 coasters from you, and if you don't sell it to us at this price, we're never going to buy anything from you again." So they would buffalo the manufacturer in, and this happened into buying and ordering the rides, and of course the manufacturer's profit margins were on the last 2 coasters, not the first 4. And then a year into that deal or two, this management team would say, "We're canceling those last 2." They put out of business 3 or 4 manufacturers when they did that. And I know just from discussions that I've had that Cedar Fair is well aware of that, and they're not going to do that. The manufacturers and suppliers are their life's blood. They need them, they want them, and they want to work with them. And I think that's going to be an added bonus to this whole merge deal for our industry. It's gonna bring the manufacturers, I believe, and the operators closer together.
All right, final question for you, Dennis. One thing that most people can acknowledge is that Six Flags was better than Cedar Fair when it came to adopting new technologies. So, with that in mind, and in the past, we've discussed on the Traction Group podcast how AI will affect park operations. But what other technology is out there that's just waiting to be adopted by the industry?
Well, I think you really identified it, Don. I think it is AI. I mean, look at every day. How many articles do we read? I know I read a half a dozen every day. I see it in the stock market of changes and evolution and what you can do now with AI. And it's kind of like Bob Pittman explained at IAPA about 20 years ago when he came in from Time Warner, and he was explaining where we were at that time with the World Wide Web. And it's probably been about 20 years. And he drew at IAPA, he drew the mountain, and he just put a little line across the top, and he said, "Here's where we are with in the industry as it relates to understanding the World Wide Web." He said, "We're not even at the point where we were when Edison brought us electricity. Look at all the things that happened after that: vacuum cleaners, refrigeration, washing machines, light bulb. It goes on and on." He went on and on and on and on, and you thought, "My God, he's right." Well, 20 years later, he was right. It was exactly what he is, and I think that's where we are with AI. I mean, I don't think anybody really understands it except the geniuses who are sitting in their offices working on it, how it's going to impact us. But I think that's going to have the biggest impact on our industry that anything we've ever seen comes along. And it's going to be on the hardware side, it's going to be on the software side, it's going to be in the marketing, it's going to be in the visuals and the entertainment, the storytelling, everything we do, AI is going to be involved with.
Yeah, I know that Don said that was the last question, but I've got to follow up
That's all
here.
right.
So
I'm good.
Of course you do.
I'm good.
no, but it's and you mentioned this is kind of like me asking you to like just be creative. With your vast experience within the industry, you probably thought of something, but obviously one of the things that I think we discussed with you was that things like demand labor and stuff like that, as far as how many people you need staffing rides and so on. So that's
Yep.
kind of like an obvious like foray for AI. And you mentioned that they're already doing that and they have been for a while. But as far as like theme park experiences, you mentioned like entertainment and stuff like that. What's something that kind of comes to mind that a guest would see that involves AI, from like the entertainment or rides or anything like that? That's uniquely something that you would find in a theme park. Like, what do you think AI does to fit into that as far as like an experience is concerned?
Well, I think Ryan, this thing, who could have predicted what this thing was going to do? We have this. We can, you know, do just about anything, contact anybody, find out anything we want instantaneously. And I think AI through this and other apparatus that comes up, it's going to allow the guests to start their visit and planning before they even get to the park. Then when they get to the park, they're going to use something like this that takes them through the park. Then when you're in the park, you're going to have the AI experience explaining you the stories and all of take us to a level of technology and depth for storytelling and experience that we've never seen. And I don't have the answers, but I know it's going to be broad and it's going to be deep, and we can already see what's happening. The other day, my wife has a chain of consignment stores, and I was showing her something on AI, and I said, Donna Speigel starts Snooty Fox, and she is one of the leaders in the United States, and she da da da, and it wrote a story in 4 seconds. You've seen
Mhm.
this; you guys have done
Yeah.
it, and it was amazing. I mean, uh, I had to do a little editing, but it was amazing what it did, and you know, I certainly don't understand how that happened that quickly, but that's the kind of stuff we're going to see and the things we're going to experience. I mean, it's going to be right in our face. It's going to be there with us all the time.
Yeah. I mean, maybe when it comes to like the IPs and stuff like that, maybe if you're a certain age group, you'll be exposed to Looney Tunes, and if you're a different age group, you'll be exposed to DC. I mean, you're right. The possibilities are endless.
Yeah.
They're limited only by our imagination and probably a budget.
Yeah. And I think AI will be our imagination to take us to those levels, actually. So,
Yeah, I'm tired of being imaginative, so I'm kind of excited for AI.
would you like a second opinion?
No, I'll just here. Let me ask Chat GPT.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Well, hey, really appreciate you being a three-peater on the show. Maybe you can be the first. We've had three people do three before, but we've never had a four-timer. So we got to wait
Okay.
for.
Let's think of another topic right now. What do we?
Well, we still have to have you on Tower Topics because I've heard that you know a few things about Kings Island, as does Don. I don't. I've never been there. But uh, but yeah, we'll just have to sit back and check the ITPS news and find like a big industry story to have an excuse to have you on sooner than later, so you can be the fourth one. But before we go, why don't you go ahead and plug your newsletter, and maybe for those of you that didn't catch it, for the previous times you were on or aren't involved
Yeah.
in the industry very much, just talk a little bit about ITPS and what you do.
Yeah, sure. Well, ITPS is 41 years old. We've worked on over 500 projects in 55 countries, really from A to Z, from feasibility study all the way to design, pre opening operations, management, training. We have a list of, I call the pilot's checklist that clients come to us on, and we can show them and say, and they go, we need that, we don't need this. And that's fine with us. We'll work with them in any manner and form that we want. And we do publish what I consider the best daily publication in the industry. It covers, it's the ITPS Daily News,
Mhm.
as we say in there, all the fun that's fit the print. And we've done that for 26 years, 15 years or 10 years before IAP ever put out their first one or anybody else. And we reach, oh gosh, I think Sean told me it's over 5 or 6,000 people a day and then that gets spread out and passed around. So that ITPS Daily News is read by all the leaders in the industry. I hear that every year when I go to IAPA. They say, "Hey, Speigel, first thing we do in the morning is open the computer, our coffee or tea, and we read the ITPS Daily News." So it really that's where I learn. I come in the morning and I do it. The team's already got it done. I'm learning from it. Uh, so it's if you're interested in subscribing to that, it's free to anybody, and it's you can go to Sean Haas, SHWANHAAS at enterthemepark.com, and that's INTER theme park THEMEPARK.com, and just ask to be added to the list. And when he does, just confirm that you've reached it. We don't give out names or anything like that. I think it's been a great service to the industry, and I think it's helped educate thousands and thousands of people on what's happening and what's going on. So we don't suppress anything. If there's an accident, we talk about it. If there's a sale, we talk about it. The good, the bad, and the ugly. So you can really find out what's going on.
Yeah. If you ever wondered, if you enjoy our pick six, you might as well just listen to or get the news beforehand from his newsletter, because that's where we get all that information. It's the best consolidated area for new. And the cool part is if you're in the United States, it is biased towards the United States, but there is Wallaby Holland, stuff like that. You guys don't stray away from trying that sort of stuff too.
No, I'm. In fact, I have it here on the desk somewhere. I write 3 articles a month for magazines. One for Kermes, one for Interpark, and one for Asia Attractions. And we talk about what's happening in those parts of the world and globally. So that's always something you can go to our website and find. And when those articles come out, uh, you can read that. And incidentally, today's article that came out in Kermes over there is, I'm a big believer, and I'm putting all the chips in the center of the table, no matter what you hear and what you see, that Disney has to have a fifth gate. They are the dominant force, and they're going to get through Epic Universe and not muddy the water. But you're going to see where Disney comes out with their fifth gate. It's been 26 years since they've opened a gate in their parks. So uh, I've had people call me and say, "Nah, it ain't going to happen." And I go, "I'm putting a few more chips in the center of the table, guys."
I'd put all my chips in the center of the table too on that one.
Yeah, they've got to. All righty. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks again for being on the show. So, obviously, we can check out your website, enterthemepark.com, and we'll put a link in the description for checking you guys out, and, get on that newsletter and get the latest news. So thanks again, Dennis.
I want my 5-timer jacket when I hit 5 time, like Saturday Night Live. Okay.
I'm assuming that by the time you hit 5, we're going to have like national sponsors. If you want to be our agent for that, you'd probably be really good at it.
Put that in the news.
Yeah. No, that would be funny. Put it in the news, be like, we're looking for a sponsor for this podcast. That would be great.
You guys do a great service, and I appreciate it. And that's why I love to come on the show and talk to you. You both know the industry, and Don, you've been in it since you were a baby and had hair. I saw you in our news the other day. I saw you with that big curly mop you had at one time. And
oh yeah.
So always a pleasure to be with you guys. And anytime I can share something or make somebody happy, let me know.
Awesome.
All right, Dennis. Thank you.